If Shadow hadn't barked that day, Clara might still be locked in silence. It wasn't just any bark. It was a kind that slices through noise, that makes adults freeze and children drop their crayons. The kind that says, something's wrong. Here, look closer. It happened on a warm Wednesday morning at Haven Ridge Elementary, just before recess. The school was buzzing with excitement. Today was safety day. Local police officers brought their K-9 units to show the students how dogs like Shadow help find missing people and catch bad guys. Everything was going smoothly. The kids loved petting the well-trained German shepherds, giggling as the dogs demonstrated how they sniffed out hidden objects or took down padded decoys. Officer Elena Ruiz, Shadow's handler, had done this dozens of times before, but no one expected what happened when Clara rolled by. She was quiet as always, 8 years old, small for her age, pale. Her wheelchair made almost no sound across the hallway tiles. Her aunt, a woman in her 50s with cropped gray hair and a heavy perfume, was pushing her, smiling tightly at the officers. Shadow's ears perked up, his stance stiffened. Then, all at once, he lunged. Shadow, no. Elena held back hard on his leash. The German shepherd bared his teeth and barked in rapid, sharp bursts. His tail was rigid, hackles raised. He wasn't just excited. He was alert, insistent, even desperate. Every time the woman tried to will Clara away, Shadow surged forward, barking louder. Gasps filled the hallway. Kids stared. A few teachers stepped in, unsure whether to intervene or just trust a dog. Elena managed to pull Shadow to the side. I'm so sorry, she said quickly, glancing at the child. He never acts like this unless... The woman snapped. He must not like wheelchairs. Happens all the time. But Elena wasn't so sure. Shadow had been around dozens of people in wheelchairs, including Elena's own father. He never reacted like this. And when Clara's eyes met Shadow's just for a second, Elena swore she saw something. Not fear the dog, but recognition and something else. A silent plea. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She replayed the incident over and over. Something about the way Shadow refused to calm down. The way his bark turned guttural when the woman touched Clara's shoulder. It all gnawed at her. Shadow had never falsely alerted in 5 years of service. He'd found drugs inside hollowed-out books, tracked fugitives through swamps, and even sniffed out a gas leak behind an old motel. He was more than a dog. He was her partner. Her intuition turned canine. And today, his instincts had locked onto an 8-year-old girl. But why? The next morning, Elena made a decision. Before reporting for duty, she stopped by Haven Ridge Elementary again. She brought Shadow with her, of course. She told the front desk she'd forgotten a training marker during the demo. It was a flimsy excuse, but no one questioned her. Elena and Shadow slowly walked the hall again, tracing their steps from yesterday. When they passed the spot where Clara had rolled by, Shadow stopped, sat, then whined. That wasn't part of any routine. He nosed the air and sniffed along the wall, then down toward the floor. His tail wagged slowly, uncertain, restrained, but his eyes stayed locked on Elena. Something was still bothering him. Elena crouched beside him. You wanted to follow up, don't you? His tail thumped once, hard. Hey, if you're loving this mystery as much as we are, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. At Heroes for Animals, we tell real and inspired stories about the incredible bond between humans and animals, especially our heroic canines. Be part of the family. Later that afternoon, Elena ran a quick background check. Clara Jennings, no parents listed, legal guardian. Melissa Fay, marked as a maternal aunt. Elena dug deeper. No hospital records confirmed Clara's paralysis. No police report for the car accident Melissa claimed had paralyzed the poor thing. No school records before 6 months ago. It was like Clara hadn't existed until recently. And something about Melissa Fay's records didn't sit right either. 2 changes of address in the past year. A short stint working as an in-home nurse. Terminated for conduct unbecoming. A missing persons alert in a neighboring state 3 years ago matched her photo under a different name. Elena's pulse quickened. Could Clara be one of the hidden kids? Children taken, not always for ransom, but for benefits or worse, control. That evening, She fed Shadow and watched him curl up on his bed near the kitchen table. He was restless, tail twitching in his sleep like he was chasing something. Or maybe someone. She glanced at her phone. No calls from the school, no follow-ups, no red flags raised. Of course not, because when a child is hidden well enough, they stop being a red flag. They become invisible, but not to Shadow. Never to Shadow. Elena Ruiz had been in law enforcement long enough to know when something didn't add up. She trusted her gut. But even more than that, she trusted Shadow. And right now, every hair on his back said Clara Jennings was not okay. The problem was instinct alone didn't get you a warrant. It was a quiet Thursday morning when Elena made her next move. She wasn't on the Clara case officially. There wasn't even a case yet. But that didn't mean she couldn't look around a little. She called the school's guidance counselor, a woman named Linda Carrington, someone Elena had worked with during a community event the previous year. Linda, Elena said, her voice warm but firm. I know this is unusual, but do you have a few minutes to talk about one of your students? There was a pause on the line. Depends which student and what for. Elena chose her words carefully. Clara Jennings. I was there for the K9 demo. Shadow had a reaction, a big one. Another pause and, yeah. Linda sighed. I saw that. Surprised me, to be honest. That dog of yours seems like a good judge of character. Elena smiled faintly. He usually is. Linda agreed to meet over coffee. At the cafe down the street from the station, Elena and Linda sat in a booth near the window. Linda, a woman in her mid-50s with kind eyes and callous hands from a lifetime of comforting others, brought out a manila folder. I'm not supposed to show you this, she said under her breath, but something's been bothering me, too. She pulled out a simple child drawing. Elena's breath caught. It was done in crayon, uneven lines, and innocent colors, but it sent chills down her spine. A little girl stood in the middle of a field. She was walking, not in a wheelchair. Behind her, a tall woman held a leash, dragging something small and hunched over. The woman's face was scribbled red. What is this supposed to be? Elena asked. She told me it's just a made-up story. Said she was playing pretend. But I asked her about the girl walking, and she whispered, that's who I used to be. Linda leaned in. She said she still dreams about walking, that her legs work in the dreams. Elena stared at the drawing again. Is that a dog being dragged? Linda nodded. That's what I thought, but she wouldn't say. Just shut down completely. Elena's mouth went dry. Does she have any bruises? Marks? Anything unusual? Linda hesitated, then opened the next sheet. A health incident report. Nurse documented a circular bruise on her lower back 2 weeks ago. Claimed she fell off her chair. I filed it, but without any real evidence. Elena knew all too well. Without bruises in the right places, without photos, without medical confirmation, it was just a report in a drawer. Forgotten. But Shadow hadn't forgotten. That night, Elena fed Shadow his usual kibble and sat on the floor beside him. His eyes followed her movements, calm but alert. You knew, didn't you? She whispered, stroking his fur. You knew she was being hurt. He licked her hand once. That was enough. The next morning, Elena filed a formal welfare concern with the Department of Child Safety, citing reasonable suspicion based on Clara's inconsistent medical history, behavior, and known caregiver instability. But the case would take time, so she planned something faster. That Friday, the police department hosted a community safety Q&A at Haven Ridge Elementary. Elena volunteered, bringing Shadow along, but this time she asked if she could visit individual classrooms to talk about how canines protect people in danger. When they reached Clara's classroom, Elena was careful. She kept it light, letting Shadow do tricks, letting the kids ask questions. Then she knelt beside Clara's desk and asked gently, "Would you like to pet him again?" Clara nodded faintly. Shadow approached slowly and rested his head on her knee. Clara's hand trembled as she reached forward, but then she pulled something from her pocket, a folded piece of paper. She slid it under Shadow's collar. When no one was looking, Elena noticed. She didn't say a word. Back at the car, Elena retrieved the note. For words written in shaky, childlike print, Help me, she lies. Elena stared at it, heart pounding. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was a cry for help. Saturday morning, Elena knocked on the door of a trailer home parked on the edge of town. Melissa Fay opened the door, still in her bathrobe. "Officer," she said coolly, "what brings you here?" "I wanted to check in. After the demo at the school, Clara seemed a little off. Just making sure she's all right." Melissa narrowed her eyes. "She's fine, just tired a lot. Her condition makes her weak." Elena glanced past her shoulder. "Mind if I say hi?" "Actually, we're in the middle of breakfast." From inside, a loud thud followed by silence. Elena's expression darkened. "Ma'am, I need to see the child." Melissa's smile vanished. "Without a warrant, I don't think so. I have a welfare concern filed with Child Protective Services. If you refuse, I'll return with backup and probable cause." Melissa hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside was cluttered, musty. Clara sat in her chair at the table, eyes downcast. Her lips moved as if silently rehearsing what to say. Elena crouched beside her. "Hey, sweetheart, you remember me?" Clara nodded faintly. "Shadows in the car. He asked about you." Clara looked up at that. Her first real spark. "Did you write the note?" Elena whispered. Clara's lips trembled, but she nodded. Melissa stepped closer, but Elena stood, blocking her. "I'm going to have a medic check her. You're not to interfere." Melissa's mouth opened to argue, then froze as she saw Shadow. He was standing at the doorframe now. Elena hadn't called him in. He'd come on his own, his body tensed, his ears pinned. And when Melissa moved, even a step forward, he growled low and deep. The medics arrived within the hour. Clara was removed from the home and taken to the hospital. Initial tests confirmed Elena's fear. High levels of lidocaine in her system, a numbing agent. She hadn't been paralyzed by an accident. She'd been drugged systematically, repeatedly, likely for years. Melissa Fay was taken into custody. When interrogated, she confessed to using the child to collect donations and medical benefits. "No one questions a sweet little girl in a wheelchair," she said coldly. They would now. At the hospital, Clara lay in a clean bed, finally safe. A therapist spoke to her softly as Elena and Shadow entered. Clara's face lit up when she saw them. "Is he really my hero?" she asked. Elena smiled. "No, he's our hero." Shadow walked to her bedside, curled up beside her feet, and just for a moment, closed his eyes. He had found her, and he wasn't leaving again. 3 days after Clara was removed from Melissa Fay's home, she took her first unaided step. It was shaky, just 1 foot sliding forward from the hospital bed to the tile floor. But when the physical therapist saw it, she stopped mid-sentence and dropped her clipboard. Hey, the therapist said gently, kneeling beside her. "It's okay. I'm just surprised in a good way." Clara looked down at her feet, like she didn't quite believe they were real, like she dreamed about them moving so long. The fact that they obeyed now felt like a trick. She tried again. Another step. Her knees wobbled, but they held. Outside the glass door, Officer Elena Ruiz watched the moment in silence, arms crossed over her chest. Heart caught somewhere between relief and heartbreak. Next to her, Shadow sat still, ears perked, watching Clara the way only a dog with too much wisdom in his eyes could. "She's walking," Elena whispered. Shadow's tail thumped once on the tile. That afternoon, Elena sat in the small conference room of the hospital's pediatric ward. Clara's new social worker, a woman named Jordan Freeman, clicked her pen nervously as they reviewed the case file. Elena could tell Jordan was newer to the job, too careful with her wording, too hopeful in her eyes. "I'm recommending temporary foster care while we look for any possible family connections," Jordan said. But so far, Melissa's statement hasn't led to anything useful. Elena flipped through the medical notes, and her real identity, still unknown. Melissa admitted she falsified the guardianship documents years ago, said she found Clara during a housing shuffle after a fire in Arizona. Jordan shook her head. "We're checking into possible missing children matches." Elena tapped her finger against a highlighted section of the file. "You know," she said slowly, If she'd never put her in that chair, she might have stayed invisible forever. Jordan nodded. That chair became a costume, and Clara, just a prop in the show. Later that evening, Elena visited Clara's hospital room alone. Clara was awake, sitting up with a notebook in her lap. She had started drawing again, this time a forest scene. It was surprisingly detailed for someone her age. The way the light came through the trees, the shading on the leaves. One corner of the page was empty, though, like something had been erased. "Hey," Elena said softly. "You're getting really good at that." Clara smiled, just barely. Elena sat down beside her. "You know, we're trying to find out where you came from, who your real family is." Clara's hands tensed around the pencil. Her eyes didn't lift from the page. Elena waited. Then Clara whispered, "I had a mom." Elena nodded slowly. "Do you remember her name?" Clara shook her head. "Just her singing. She used to sing to me at night. I think it was a song about stars." "What else?" "Her hair was dark, and she smelled like cinnamon." Elena's eyes softened. "That's something. We can start there." Clara finally looked up. "Do you think she's still out there?" "I don't know," Elena answered honestly. "But I think someone out there loves you, and we're going to try to find them." Clara nodded. Then, unexpectedly, she reached down and laid a small, crumpled photo on the bed. Elena picked it up. It was old, faded, a snapshot taken from the back of a crowd, maybe a festival, maybe a fair. In the center was a woman with long, dark hair holding a little girl who looked no older than 4. The little girl had Clara's eyes. Elena's chest tightened. "Where did you get this?" she asked. Clara shrugged. "It was in the lining of my coat. I think I hid it from her." Elena held the photo like it was glass. They had a lead. The next morning, Elena turned the photo over to Jordan and a missing persons analyst. By noon, the image had been enhanced. The woman's face run through every available database. At 3:14 p.m., a hit came back. Lena Morales, last seen 4 years ago, age 28 at the time, reported missing after a domestic dispute in Tucson. The Lou system. The report said she had a daughter, Amelia, age 4. Clara's birth name was likely Amelia Morales. Elena exhaled slowly. She's been missing for years. Jordan looked stunned, and no one found her. "Because no one was looking," Elena replied. "They thought she'd vanished into the system. They didn't know someone had rewritten her story." That evening, Elena returned to the hospital. She didn't say anything at first, just sat next to Clara and handed her the newly printed photo. "Do you remember this woman's name?" she asked gently. Clara stared at the photo. Her bottom lip trembled, then in the softest voice, "Mommy." Elena's throat tightened. "We think we know who she is. Her name is Lena Morales." Clara's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "Is she alive?" "We don't know yet, but we're going to find out." The search began. Elena and the local authorities in Arizona reopened the cold case. It took only 48 hours to confirm what they'd feared. Lena had been found deceased on a riverbank weeks after her disappearance. Foul play suspected, no convictions ever made. Melissa Fay, it turned out, had been living in Arizona at the time, had volunteered at shelters during the fire recovery efforts. She had seen Lena and Clara together at a temporary shelter. And one night, both were gone, except Melissa had only taken one of them. Elena debated how to tell Clara. In the end, she didn't have to. Clara was a quiet child, but not a foolish one. When Elena came in with a heavy expression, Clara simply said, "She's gone, isn't she?" Elena sat beside her and nodded. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "She didn't leave you. She didn't want to. You need to know that." Clara held the photo against her chest. Her body trembled. Shadow nudged her hand with his nose, then rested his head gently in her lap. "I remember her singing," Clara whispered. "I remember she said I was her star." "You still are," Elena said, "and you're safe now." That night, Elena stared at the ceiling above her bed, thinking of all the kids that slipped through cracks like Clara. Amelia had. She looked over at Shadow, curled up near the door. "You did it," she whispered. His ears twitched. He never needed words. For the first time in years, Clara Morales, formerly known as Clara Jennings, had a room of her own. It wasn't large, just a small guest room at the edge of a modest home in a quiet Arizona suburb. But it had something she'd never truly had before: a locked door she could control, a window that opened to real sunlight, not a parking lot, and a foster mom who made pancakes shaped like smiley faces. Her new guardian, Rachel Monroe, was in her early 40s and worked from home as a freelance illustrator. She had no children of her own, but her house was full of color, art supplies, handmade quilts, and a bookcase that leaned slightly to the left. There were also two cats who stared at Shadow like he was a lion dropped into their kingdom. Shadow didn't mind. He took a spot on the rug by Clara's bed, watching her as she finally, tentatively, played again. It had been nearly 3 weeks since the truth came out. 3 weeks of therapy, of court dates, of piecing together the story Melissa Fay had tried to erase. The police ruled Lena Morales' death a homicide, but the trail was cold, the evidence too old. Melissa remained behind bars, awaiting sentencing for kidnapping, fraud, and child endangerment. And Clara, she was trying to learn what it meant to exist, not survive. But even safety has shadows. It began on a Monday afternoon. Clara was in the driveway, sketching the two neighborhood dogs playing fetch. Rachel had invited Officer Elena over for coffee, and Shadow was curled at her feet under the porch swing. Suddenly, Shadow lifted his head, then stood, his ears pointed toward the far end of the street. Elena followed his gaze. There, half a block down, a man in a gray hoodie stood perfectly still. He wasn't looking at any house in particular, but his head tilted slightly, like he was listening. Elena squinted. "Rachel, do you know him?" Rachel stepped out from the porch. "No, he's not from around here." Clara, sensing the tension, looked up and followed their eyes. The man turned and walked away, not fast, but with purpose. Shadow growled once, low, quiet, enough to raise every hair on Elena's arm. Later that night, after Clara went to bed, Elena asked Rachel for the home security feed. The camera on the driveway caught the figure clearly. Medium height, slim build, hood pulled low, face turned just enough to avoid identification. But Elena noticed something else. He hadn't just passed by. He'd stopped. He'd watched Clara for a full 23 seconds, and his hands, they hadn't been in his pockets. One held a phone, the other a small silver object, a lighter. The next day, Elena filed a report. She couldn't prove intent. The man hadn't trespassed, hadn't spoken. But Elena had been a cop long enough to recognize that stillness, the way predators waited, just out of reach, just beyond comfort. She requested patrols around Rachel's neighborhood, installed a second camera near the fence, and kept her phone volume on high at night. But she didn't tell Clara. Not yet. 2 days later, Clara had her first nightmare since moving in. Rachel found her in the hallway, curled up against the wall, crying quietly. Shadow lay beside her, head pressed against her chest. Elena rushed over after Rachel called. Clara looked up, her face pale. I remembered something. Elena knelt beside her. "What is it, sweetie?" Clara wiped her nose with her sleeve. "I remember the man who came to the shelter before Mommy disappeared. He wore a gray hoodie." Elena's heart sank. Rachel whispered, "You think it's the same man?" "I think," Elena said slowly, "someone's trying to finish what they started." Elena pulled every record from the Lena Morales case, dug into associates, ex-boyfriends, distant relatives, anyone with a reason to harm her, and one name kept coming back. Martin Kessler, Lena's ex. Long arrest record. Domestic abuse charges, most of which were dropped when Lena failed to appear in court. He disappeared the same week she did. And now Martin Kessler had an active warrant in Nevada for assault. Elena sent the footage from Rachel's home to the FBI. They couldn't confirm it was Martin, but the build, the posture, even a habit of rubbing his left hand noted in a previous arrest report, it all fit. The next move had to be careful. Elena worked with Child Protection Services and the local police to plan a quiet relocation for Clara, a temporary safe house, somewhere outside the city. Not forever, just until they could confirm whether Martin was in the area. But Clara noticed the tension. One afternoon, she stood in the hallway watching Elena pack up some of Shadow's gear. "Are we leaving?" she asked softly. Elena hesitated, just for a few days, somewhere safe. Because of the man. Elena met her eyes. Yes. Clara took a shaky breath. Will Shadow come with us? Always, Elena said, placing a hand on the dog's back. Wherever you go, he goes. The safe house was quiet, out near the mountains, with a porch that creaked when you walked too fast. Clara spent her days drawing, watching birds, and asking Elena questions she didn't always know how to answer. Do you think he's still watching me? Not anymore, Elena would say. He won't get near you again. At night, Shadow would patrol the front and back doors, silent and determined. Elena started sleeping in a chair by the window, badge on the table, her sidearm within reach. Then, on the fourth night, the perimeter alarm went off at 12 a.m., a motion sensor near the rear of the property. Elena was on her feet in seconds. Shadow stood frozen, every muscle in his body stiff. They moved together. Elena crept to the back door, Shadow at her heel. There, just beyond the fence, a figure darted into the woods. Elena didn't hesitate. She let Shadow go. He moved like lightning, a shadow among shadows. The figure tripped, tried to scramble. Shadow lunged, his bark cutting through the trees. Within minutes, Elena caught up, gun drawn. Martin Kessler was on the ground, blood on his face, breathing hard. A knife lay just inches from his hand. Shadow stood over him, teeth bared, ready to strike again. Martin looked up, defeated. She's not supposed to be alive, he whispered. Elena lowered her weapon just enough to cuff him. She is, and she's never going to be hurt again. Back at the cabin, Clara waited with Rachel and another officer. When Elena walked in, Shadow at her side, she simply nodded. Clara understood, and for the first time since Lena's death, she slept through the night. The news spread faster than anyone expected. Within 48 hours of Martin Kessler's arrest, local media picked up the story. K-9 dog tracks down fugitive, rescues kidnapped girl. They didn't share Clara's real name. Her identity was protected. But they showed Shadow's photo, proudly sitting beside Officer Elena Ruiz, tongue out, tail curled around his feet, like he knew he'd done something big. Clara watched the report from the living room of the safe house, curled up on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Shadow was, of course, lying right at her feet like he always did. When his face came on screen, Clara smiled. That's my dog, she whispered. Elena chuckled softly from the kitchen. You know, I think he'd agree with you. Rachel, who was drying dishes at the sink, added, I don't think I've ever seen a dog so connected to someone. Clara looked down at Shadow, then reached out and gently scratched behind his ears. He listens to me, even when I don't say anything. That week, the department held a small ceremony to honor Shadow. It wasn't a grand parade, just something simple at the station. A few officers, city officials, and a group of school kids who brought drawings they'd made of Shadow and superhero capes. Clara wore a blue dress Rachel had picked out, and for the first time in public, she walked into the room with no assistance, no chair, no crutches, just her own 2 feet. She held Elena's hand on one side and Shadow's leash in the other. The moment was quiet, but powerful. Shadow received a medal, one of those heavy, gold-colored ones that jingled when he moved. He didn't care about it, of course. But when Clara slipped it over his neck and kissed the top of his head, his tail wagged with a proud thump. Later, when a reporter asked Clara if she had anything she wanted to say, she took a deep breath and looked directly into the camera. I just want people to listen to kids who are quiet. Sometimes we can't say everything, but dogs like Shadow, they hear us anyway. No one in the room blinked for a solid 10 seconds. Then the applause came, loud and real. Back at the house, Clara found something in the mailbox that didn't have a return address. It was an envelope, thick and creased, with her name written in messy handwriting. She brought it inside and gave it to Elena, unsure what to do with it. Elena opened it slowly, reading the letter inside with careful eyes. Then she froze. What is it? Clara asked. It's from someone who knew your mom, Elena said softly. A woman named Nancy. She worked at the shelter with Lena before everything happened. Elena handed her the letter, and Clara read it slowly, her lips moving with each word. Dear Amelia, I don't know if you remember me, but your mom talked about you every single day. She called you her little star. She said when things got hard, all she had to do was hold your hand, and everything felt okay. After the fire, we were separated. I tried to find you both, but by the time I got back to the shelter, you were gone. I never stopped looking. When I saw the news about the dog, I just knew it had to be you. You're so brave. I know your mom will be proud. If you ever want to meet, I'd love to see you again. With love, Nancy Torres. Clara folded the letter and pressed it to her chest. I remember her, she whispered. She used to braid Mommy's hair, and she gave me pink jelly beans when I had bad dreams. Elena smiled. Would you like to meet her? Clara nodded. I think Mommy would want that. The meeting with Nancy happened a few days later at a quiet diner near town. Clara waited nervously in a booth, sipping hot chocolate. When Nancy walked in, a woman in her 60s, hair pulled back in a tight bun, eyes full of tears before she even reached the table. Clara stood without thinking. They hugged. No big speeches, no questions, just arms around each other in the soft whisper of, "You're safe now." Nancy brought photos of Lena, ones Clara had never seen. One of Lena laughing in a hammock, another holding baby Clara at a beach, their matching dark hair tangled in the wind. She loved the ocean, Nancy said, tears sliding down her cheeks. She always said when you got older, she'd take you there, let you walk barefoot in the surf. Clara glanced at Shadow, then back at Nancy. Maybe we can still go someday. You and me. Nancy smiled through the tears. I like that. That night, back at the house, Clara sat beside Rachel on the back porch, the stars bright above them. Elena had gone home for the evening, but Shadow stayed behind, lying on the deck near Clara's feet. Do you think dogs believe in heaven? Clara asked suddenly. Rachel turned. I think if anyone knows what heaven feels like, it's them. Clara reached down and ran her hand through Shadow's fur. I think Mommy sent him, she said softly. Like when I couldn't talk, he said the words for me. Rachel didn't answer right away. Then maybe she did. They sat there a while, the stars blinking gently above them. Clara leaned her head on Rachel's shoulder. I'm not afraid anymore. Rachel placed an arm around her. You don't have to be. Later that night, Clara placed a photo of her mom beside her bed. She opened her sketchbook and started to draw, not a forest or a street corner or a woman in red. She drew herself, smiling, standing. Shadow was beside her, tail up, tongue out, and behind them, the sky full of stars. But one star was bigger than the rest. She labeled it in small cursive letters, Mom. 6 months later, Clara Morales stood on the stage of Haven Ridge Elementary's auditorium, hands slightly trembling, heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't wearing a costume, no mask, no crutches. And for the first time in her young life, she wasn't pretending to be someone else just to survive. This time, she was seen completely and entirely as herself. The school was hosting its annual Voices of Courage event, a new tradition started in response to Clara's story. Students were encouraged to share poems, stories, or experiences that had helped shape their sense of bravery. Clara had signed up last minute. No one pressured her. No one expected her to speak. But she wanted to. She needed to. She stepped up to the microphone and looked out into the sea of faces. Her classmates, her teachers, Rachel seated in the front row. And of course, Shadow sitting calmly at Elena's feet near the stage stairs, watching with eyes that had seen every part of her journey. Clara took a breath, and then she began. A year ago, I was quiet all the time. Not because I didn't have things to say, but because no one ever asked me to speak. I used to think I was invisible. But then someone barked for me. A dog, a hero, a friend. He didn't use words, but he heard the ones I kept buried. He told people I needed help, even when I didn't know how to ask. Now I use my voice, not just for me, but for kids like me. If someone is quiet, it doesn't mean they're okay. Sometimes silence is the loudest cry. The audience was still, a deep, reverent stillness. Then came the applause, loud, tearful, full of warmth. Shadow barked once, just once, as if to say, "That's my girl." Clara came off the stage and went straight into Elena's arms. You did it, Elena whispered. I was terrified, Clara replied, face buried in her shoulder. But you stood anyway, Elena said. That's what makes it brave. A few weeks later, the White House announced a national recognition award for K9 Shadow, the Service K9 Medal of Honor. It was given to dogs who had made extraordinary contributions to justice, safety, and lives saved. The ceremony was held in D.C., and they flew Clara, Rachel, Elena, and of course, Shadow to attend. The event was grand. Flags waving, press cameras flashing, dignitaries giving speeches. But the moment that mattered most wasn't on camera. It was when Clara walked on a national stage, placed a paw print medal on Shadow's vest, and whispered, "You saved my voice." And in that moment, Shadow looked up at her, not wagging, not barking, just watching, with a quiet, steady loyalty that had carried her through her darkest days. By fall, Clara had started writing a children's book with Rachel's help. It was called The Dog Who Heard Me. It wasn't just her story. It was the story of any kid who had been silenced, isolated, or unseen. Each page was illustrated in soft watercolor, and every chapter ended with a simple truth. Even if you whisper, someone out there is listening. The book was published by Winter and started spreading. Libraries, shelters, schools, and soon letters began arriving. Letters from other kids. I thought I was the only one. Your book helped me tell my mom. I think I'm ready to talk now. Clara read every single one and cried every single time. One cold December night, Rachel, Elena, and Clara decorated the Christmas tree in the living room. Shadow lay beside the fireplace, his nose twitching every time Clara moved too fast with the candy canes. Rachel handed Clara a final ornament, a small painted star with the word voice written in the center. Clara hung it high on the tree, just above Shadow's head. Then she curled up beside him and whispered, I didn't just find you, you found me. That evening, Rachel posted a photo of the tree with Clara and Shadow lying side by side beneath it to the Heroes for Animals channel. The caption read, This is what happens when we listen, not with ears, but with heart. A bark changed a life. A child found her voice. And a hero wore fur. Sometimes the smallest sound, the bark that cut through a hallway, the whisper folded in a crayon drawing, the voice that shook behind a microphone, is the one that changes everything. Because in a world that often overlooks the quietest people, one dog listened, and a girl became more than just heard. She became whole. Now it's your turn. Have you ever overlooked someone who was silent, thinking they were okay? What would happen if, instead of waiting for words, you simply noticed the silence? Let us know in the comments. And never forget, sometimes heroes don't speak, they bark.